Welcome to Good Thinking Live. I wish I could see all of your faces, but since I can't, the next best thing is for you to let me know who you are and where you're from and to participate. Our first question, streaming live right now from LinkedIn Live and YouTube Live, is what is not critical thinking? So, in addition to letting everyone know who you are and where you're from, and if you are a regular good thinker, you know the drill. Let us know in the chat. This is a conversation, not a lecture. So definitely get involved in the conversation because we're going to dive into what may be seen as the downsides or some of the downsides to critical thinking. And that leads to the question. All right. And you could put like in the beginning, yes or no, yes or no. Do companies really want critical thinking? And more specifically, does your company really want critical thinkers? Now, you may be a boss at a big company. You may own a company. Maybe you're a solopreneur or an entrepreneur, but that gives a different perspective. Or you're just an employee. I don't mean just, but you're an employee and you're evaluating, does my company really want critical thinkers? Okay, so I'm going to bring in some comments. We've got Barkley from Washington, D.C. Welcome. We've got Michael in the house from Toronto, regular good thinkers. We've got, we're getting a lot of, I'm going to try to bring in as many comments as we've got Catherine from Germany. And, I love it. Good thinkers talking amongst themselves from Virginia. And we've got Ryan from Los Angeles. And we've got Mary Lena from Germany. Sorry if I mispronounce. Adam from South Carolina. Roy, regular good thinker from Philadelphia. Andrea from Louisville. And now, okay, so Michael's got the first answer. Woohoo! Where are my rubber chickens? Rubber chickens, for those of you new to the show, we get rubber chickens. Why rubber chickens? Just pretend these are more valuable than NFTs. All right, rubber chicken for being the first. So Michael says, not always. Companies want lemmings. Why do companies want lemmings? Yes, but we have to go to work now. Let's see, Carla. Arvin from India. And we've got from Oman, Hamad. And we've got LinkedIn. So sometimes I don't know your name because the way you set up your LinkedIn profile, but welcome from Philadelphia. And from Italy, Giuseppe. Steven says, greetings from the city once called Stumptown because of all the trees cut down to facilitate its growth. Farah from Tunisia. All right, so we've got some really good and a wide array of people from all over, which is great because that's what gives good thinking its juice, is these diversity of viewpoint and diversity of perspectives. So Carla says, hello, but I have to work now and my job requires critical thinking. Fantastic. I wish you could stay, but definitely come back after the show if you can't be here for the live show so that you can share with us, what does it mean that your company wants critical thinking? And Chiquita from Nairobi. And we've got Harsh. Hello, Harsh. All right, so we're going to get started. I'm going to try to bring in all of your comments. But Arvin says it depends on the company's culture. And I think that's a really good point. Hello from Ethiopia. All right, here's the next question. What is the opposite of critical thinking? What is the opposite of critical thinking? Because I think that a lot of people might think the opposite of critical thinking is bad thinking or dumb thinking or less than smart thinking. What is the opposite of critical thinking? Does anyone want to take a stab at it? And while you are taking a stab, because there's a lag on LinkedIn, there's like a 10-second lag between when I say something and when you see it. On YouTube, I think it's more synced up. So the YouTube subscribers come in at a different time. So sometimes it's hard to know, but we're going to try our best. I'm going to take a stab at my thinking about critical thinking and what the opposite of critical thinking looks like. And we've got, welcome, Medina, blind conformity. Michael says blind conformity. Excellent. Excellent. Blind conformity might be the opposite. It might, but is it the exact opposite? Does it define the opposite? So I don't think it's bad thinking. I don't think it's not thinking. I think blind conformity can be a sign of a lack of critical thinking. We've got, opposite is intuition. Ray, I think intuition might be closer. Adam says the opposite could stay within the box. Bias, subjective thinking or emotional thinking. We've got, I would say, quickly formed answers that don't require that level of depth. Sasha says, I think all of these really deserve rubber chickens because, and multiple rubber, not just one, multiple rubber chickens. I'm going to take the banner off because I want more room for your comments. There we go. We have more room for your comments now. I think the opposite of critical thinking is our default way of thinking. Potentially, if you want to be more specific, maybe selective thinking, because our default way of thinking, Ray mentioned intuition or just kind of going with our gut. The opposite of critical thinking is our default way of thinking. And it's not, the opposite of critical thinking isn't dumb thinking. And it's interesting how the correlation between intelligence and critical thinking is not as tight as you might think. So a lot of companies want, I would argue companies want smart people. For sure, they want intelligent people. They want capable people. But I'm not so sure that all companies want or even should want in all roles critical thinkers. And that really gets to the distinction between critical thinking and other types of thinking. Now, what is critical thinking? I've been in a lot of debates lately about, different people have different opinions about what critical thinking is. And that is completely true. If you go back to kind of the grandfather or great grandfather of critical thinking, Socrates is kind of clear on what it means. And you can think of it as a distinct way of thinking from maybe creative thinking or strategic thinking. Anyone took, I think we have 3 critical thinking courses on LinkedIn Learning. And in these courses, we discuss some of the differences, but we'll touch on some of the differences here. Oh, default. So Adam says default was what I mean by in the box. Absolutely. Default way of thinking. So I think people who put the good thinkers know and who share the opposite of critical thinking were kind of spot on. And bias thinking and a lack of mindfulness and groupthink and illogical approach. Absolutely. Groupthink can be counter to critical thinking for sure. But groupthink is so harmonious, and that hints, David hinted at one of the little things we're going to talk about today. All right. So if you go back 2,500 years to Socrates, critical thinking is really about how to think. And if you're a regular Monday morning, 9 a.m. Pacific time in the United States, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, right here on LinkedIn and on YouTube, you're here regularly. You know that this is a little 30-minute time each week that we give ourselves time to think about our thinking, think about how to think, not what to think. Just say, okay, no one's going to tell me what to think. I'm going to work on improving how to think. And that really gets to the core and heart of critical thinking, because critical thinking, and I'll talk about what it isn't and what it is so you can distinguish, but critical thinking is really the tool for assessing information quality and relevance. In our courses, we talk about RRV. And Abdurraj has said he knows RRV. Welcome! Does critical thinking help in creativity? Ooh, interesting question. I'm going to get to that in a minute. That's brilliant. You are not too late. You are not late. You are only just like a few minutes in, but we're just getting to it. So you're good. All right. When you are thinking about critical thinking, you're thinking about judging and making rational decisions about what to believe and what to do about it. So when you're validating the accuracy of information, checking whether the evidence supports the argument, looking for biases, busting assumptions, that's critical thinking. So critical thinking might be, how can we find out if this is really true? So now think about asking that question. You're sitting in a meeting. Let's put yourself as the leader of the meeting. You're leading a meeting. Maybe it's over Zoom where all these faces are there. Maybe it's old fashioned, or in the future, hopefully, when we're sitting together in a meeting. But you're in a meeting and you're leading this meeting and you're sharing whatever results of something or ideas or whatever the purpose of the meeting is. And you have someone that is saying, how can we find out if this is really true? Are you appreciating the question? Or are you annoyed by the question? Or let's say that you ask it. Do you perceive your bosses to be more amenable to engaging with the question? Or would she or he be annoyed with the question? That really starts to get to the heart of whether your company really wants critical thinkers. Okay, how, Medina asked a great question. How do we get critical thinking skills? Oh, first of all, if you have LinkedIn Learning, go check out. We've got some great critical thinking courses on there. But this is what we do at my company, Applied Curiosity Lab. We go into companies, teach critical thinking. And I'll kind of tell you sometimes, It's not what all companies want. All right, first time here from Nairobi, Kenya. Yes, reflective skepticism. Brilliant, Jeffrey. Reflective skepticism. It is one of the requirements for critical thinking. Reflective skepticism, not cynicism, skepticism. All right, so we asked this question. Would your company like this? Would you like this question to be asked in a meeting? Yes or no? How can we find out if this is really true? Yes or no? Would that be annoying or welcome? All right. Very warm regards from Vienna, Austria. Welcome, Jürgen. Okay. How can we find out if this is really true? Let's talk about creative thinking. Who asked the question about creative thinking? Because creative thinking is really different. Creative thinking is looking at challenges and opportunities from fresh perspectives to conceive of or produce new ideas or solutions. So maybe a question would be, how can I rearrange this problem to see if we can discover a new solution? That's a very different question than how can we find out if this is really true, because creative thinking isn't meant for validating the reliability and relevance of evidence. That's not its purpose. Not to say that it's a lesser or more, it's not its purpose. So creative thinking is super, super useful, but you can probably do it without spending too much time evaluating the reliability and relevance of evidence. We have got a comment from Hussein. Intolerance is one of the most prominent negative aspects that pushes the thinker as well as the recipient to respond to ideas in disrespect. Absolutely. Let's see what we've got here. Let's see. Okay. Checking reliability of information equipped you to defend your point of view or prevent yourself from going off road. Absolutely. Is there any overlap between critical and lateral thinking? Yes, absolutely. But I think lateral thinking gets to the next type of thinking. I think you'll have to let me know if you agree or disagree. This is just an opinion. So you could say agree or disagree. I think it's more lateral thinking can be more related to systems thinking or strategic thinking. And strategic thinking is super important. It's generating and applying insights and opportunities to overcome barriers and solve problems and accomplish goals. So a question might be, how or why do we do that? That's a very different question than how can we find out if this is really true? Like validating the source or questioning whether there's bias in our data or noise in our data or noise or bias in our decision or in our judgment is very different than asking why. So the why, the 5 whys, problem solving, that tends to be more associated with lateral thinking and strategic thinking. And yes, there's overlap. Of course, there's overlap. We know this. But what I think is useful, and you'll tell me if you agree or disagree, I think it's useful to be able to distinguish so that you don't ignore critical thinking. If you just take all the evidence at its value, that it's relevant or reliable, and then you make the decisions on creative or strategic thinking based on a foundation of a shaky foundation, you might skip critical thinking. So I kind of think that, as much as there is overlap, I think identifying the differences is very helpful. All right, so Abdurrahman says, critical thinking is the device allowing you to scan and track reasoning. Absolutely. Absolutely. So is critical thinking, here's the next question. You can say yes or no. Is critical thinking something that intelligent people tend to do naturally? What do you think? Who's going to be first? Who is in critical thinking something that intelligent people tend to do naturally? Now, we know that critical thinking skills are predictive of some things. To the extent that we can measure critical thinking skills, that we agree that it's inferring, challenging assumptions, analyzing, probabilistic thinking. A lot of statistical and probabilistic thinking has nothing to do with intelligence. If you don't learn it, you're not going to know it. So, do you think that intelligent people tend to be critical thinkers? Andrea says yes. What do you think? Do you agree? Do intelligent people tend to be naturally critical thinkers? Well, it turns out that if you can assess it to the extent that you can measure it, these correlations are not they're not as positively correlated as you think. So Arvind says not necessarily. And I think that's probably a little closer to the data. to the extent, again, that we have reliable measures of critical thinking and reliable measures of intelligence, I mean, we can get into all kinds of arguments about what these things mean. So lateral thinking is like process thinking and moving through steps, while critical thinking is more like questioning with depth. Critical thinking, yes, because critical thinking is saying, okay, is the information we're relying on accurate? Is it reliable, and is it relevant? April says April says if they're curious. So if you think you add curiosity plus intelligence, do you think you end up with a better critical thinker or someone who is better at critical thinking? Critical thinking exists within people naturally, but when people are not aware of these skills, they can't get most of it. Abdurrahman thinks that it occurs naturally. I don't know. Do you agree? I love it. I love the involvement in the thinking. So not necessarily. Adam says no, or not necessarily. Sasha says, I think it's like you said in another course, a smart person can make a bad argument. A smart person can lack critical thinking at times. Absolutely. If you think that the opposite of critical thinking is our default way of thinking, I don't think that critical thinking or intelligent people necessarily are better critical thinkers. And here's the other thing. I don't think it's something you can know how to do without learning what it is. So are intelligent people better at Excel or, or Python, coding in Python? Well, maybe they learn it faster, but if they never ever see the code or never are exposed to it or whatever, maybe you've got some savants who can come up with coding that they've never seen it before, but I'm not sure. So Barclay says, I don't think intelligent people naturally use critical thinking, but critical thinkers get a lot of benefit. Yes, I think I'm going to give this rubber chicken. Anything takes practice, so does thinking. Yes, brilliant, rubber chicken. That's why we're here, to give ourselves time to think about our thinking. And Autumn says, I think intelligent people have the tendency to think critically. I'm not sure. Not without learning what it is and how to do it. Now, I think that maybe intelligent people can learn things faster. What are we talking about when we're talking about intelligence? That's a whole other topic. For example, is an intelligence test reliable and relevant? Well, it depends on what we're talking about, what type of intelligence. So, long before there was the emotional intelligence, people were like, well, wait, what does it even mean to be intelligent? So questioning the reliability and relevance of an intelligence test as a measure for intelligence, is that a critical thinking question? Ding, 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 ding. So this gets kind of meta because you can go deeper and deeper. Critical thinking is like common sense. You can really be smart with no common sense. Yes. And Adam says, yes. Adam gives that a vote up, and I'm going to give it a vote up too. Now, the difference is common sense is, I don't know if can you be taught common sense? I don't know. Maybe you can. Critical thinking can be taught. And it can be learned. But if you assume you know what it is, because you're smart, that can be an impediment to learning what it is. And if you work for a company that says they value it, but at every term when you say, how can we find out if this is really true? They say, shut up, Becky. Then you know that you don't have an environment where they value critical thinking, so you have to get it somewhere else. So you can get it here, right here on Good Thinking. Or you can bring Applied Curiosity Lab in to tell your company, here are the benefits, because the benefits to critical thinking are massive. Because if you're basing your information and all your decisions on a solid foundation of reliable, relevant evidence, and especially now with just the quantity of data, you're going to make better decisions. All right, so people do get better at critical thinking, and this may seem odd, but you should start questioning the assumption, why do I want to get better at critical thinking? And the reason I ask this is it's like asking critical thinking. It's a meta question. Like, why do I want to get better at critical thinking? It's kind of meta. Like, you got critical thinking and thinking about our critical thinking and so on and so forth. And Jeffrey says, intelligent people may rely on the fact that they are knowledgeable in a given area, which may produce a false sense of security and lower the probability and the use of critical thinking skills. That's going to get a rubber chicken, because that's what the data shows. There's expert bias, and it works on both ends of the spectrum. When you think you know more than you know, when you're not an expert, and when you think you know everything when you are, it's kind of an interesting. It works with another one of our frameworks called peak curiosity. All right, and Abdurrahman says you can define that by running a critical thinking killer's diagnostic. Exactly. Love it. Abdurrahman, do you want to share the critical thinking killers in the chat? All right. So Socrates, we're going to share at the very end of today's show the Socrates' last words to his executioners, which we'll leave you. We'll leave it at the end of today's show. But if you think imagine that you think you already have all the information, all of your news sources are reliable, and it's just other people who rely on fake news. I mean, my sources are the real deal. It's everyone else that has the fake news. Then, it's people. So where do you go to? Who do you go to? Where do you go for your advice? Well, you say, well, I already have my news sources. I already have my podcast. I already have my friends. And my friends and my news sources and my podcasts are the reliable, relevant ones. They're the real deal. It's the other people who aren't critical thinkers and their sources are biased. My sources aren't biased. So I'm not even going to question my sources. And therefore, I don't need to be a critical thinker in this way because I'm good. I've done it. I'm done it. All right. So Abdurrahman says, ha, ha, ha. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Authority bias, binary, black and white thinking, hasty moral judgments, label bias. We're going to get into some of those. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to get a highlight and quadruple rubber chickens for sharing some of the curiosity killers. All right. So here's a little test, personal test. Ready for a little personal test? Can you think of something that you strongly believe that you would love to question? I can't think of something. First of all, I have a hard time thinking of something that I strongly believe because I want to keep my beliefs a little bit looser, I don't want to, I want to hold my strong beliefs a little more loosely. And as I earn more credit by challenging them and challenging the assumptions, I can maybe tighten my grip. But most things that I have an opinion on, I don't have time to dive in to the extent that I earn my way to have a strong opinion. So I'm going to bring in this comment here. Let's see, from Sasha. Sasha says, common sense is an illusion of hindsight bias. Ooh. Common knowledge is not really a thing as we wish to believe. I agree. Let's see. Common sense is more like, ooh, that's hot. I better not touch this. Well, a majority of the people have learned that it's the very thing. It's learned that very thing. So it's common knowledge. Sorry, it's hard to read as things are scrolling. That is common sense. True common sense is your developed ability to learn from mistakes. Excellent. I like that. I like that kind of framing of common sense. And I don't think common sense is necessarily anything to do with critical thinking. I mean, again, all thinking is somewhat related, but it's tangent. I mean, I think you could set aside common sense as a different thing than critical thinking. You could be a critical thinker and have no common sense, and you could have common sense and not be a great critical thinker. So think about this at work. Do you want a team of people who all feel that they have the right and responsibility to question what you say or assume to be true? That's what critical thinking requires. So does your boss really want this? And does the whole organization need to be critical thinkers, or should some people just show up to work and do what they're told? And what happens when those people show up to work and do what they're told and they see things that might be missed? So I think about this, let's say that you pick up garbage for a garbage service, and you see things at a level of detail that your boss's boss might not see from her office or his office. So there's no way to communicate that if your company doesn't value critical thinking. They want you pick up the garbage, shut up, clock in, clock out, go home. Why do we want critical thinkers to be questioning the validity, the reliability, and relevance of what we tell them? Well, I don't know. Weigh in. What do you think? Does your company want that? Do you want that? So it can be more comfortable to put assumptions into the resolved category of things that we know. To Sasha's point. All right, let's see. So we've got Adam saying, sadly, that's the line of thinking that we now require labels on things like bleach that says, do not take it. Okay, that's hilarious. That gets hilarious rubber chicken, although kind of sad too. You're cracking me up, but making me sad. All right. So we're going to get into what the labels do. I think if we're going to get into any of the critical thinking killers today, it's going to be labels. So can you think of a job where critical thinking can get in the way? If you can, post the job. What kind of job can critical thinking get in the way? And if it's easier to default to seeing the good part of critical thinking because critical thinking seems like a good thing, but when you really scrape it away and look at what it is, we don't really want that. At least not for these roles. At least I don't want I want people to do what I tell them to do. I'm the boss. What do you think? Critical thinking also requires making concepts clear. So what about questions for clarification? Think about labels. This is great. We had some people bring up labels. Abdurrashid shared that labels is a critical thinking killer. We see labels all the time. And, it can get a little controversial because we're supposed to identify ourselves and, embrace our identity. And therefore we need labels. And so we need to be part of a group. I mean, I can't be specific about my individual. I need to be part of a group. And that group needs to be a label of, a middle-aged woman. I don't know. So think about this. And so much of our discourse is arguing about identity. And so these are very sticky labels. Sharing your identity has become a requirement in many companies. So why do we do this? Why do we do this? Well, it must somehow be helpful. So how is it helpful to create these labels? How is it helpful to create these labels? Well, one reason that it's helpful because labels come with assumptions. If we know what it means to be a member of a certain gender or a certain race or a certain religion or a certain nationality, we know about you. Is this label reliable and relevant? How reliable and relevant is the label of my race or my gender or my nationality or my religion? But if critical thinking requires questioning assumptions, here's the question. You guys ready? Get ready. Can sharing identity be at odds with critical thinking? Now, you've got to be able to ask these questions, even if they're kind of controversial. You got to be able to ask them. Can sharing identity be at odds with critical thinking? What about the critical thinking requirement of reasoning through logic? So if you think about sharing identity, can that be at odds with critical thinking because of a label? What about reasoning through logic? Can you assess whether an argument is logical or not, regardless of whether or not you agree with a conclusion? So here's a story. I was working with a company who thought that evaluating arguments about controversial topics is too opinion-based. So what's considered a good argument is an opinion. So if I present an argument that supports an opinion that I believe, then I would evaluate other people who support that same opinion. I would evaluate their argument based on whether they agree with me, not about the quality of the argument. So can you critical thinkers, good thinkers, can you evaluate the quality of an argument regardless of whether you agree with the conclusion? How do you do that? That's something that critical thinking requires. So if a company is going to have their special kind of dogma of how you have to believe or how you have to think or what you can discuss and what you can and can't ask, that's totally fine. That's the company's prerogative. But they need to be clear that they are choosing that kind of harmony over critical thinking. They're prioritizing that over critical thinking. Okay, so Adam says companies want critical thinkers, but managers and bosses many times don't. Absolutely. Labels typically bring a pack of characteristics. So when you've attached to the label, you also get characteristics despite that you don't have them. And that's so true because one has to question the assumptions that come with labels. Sasha says, it can be. We talk about discretion when self-disclosing in my profession. It can be enrich an experience or it can destroy it. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Adam says yes. All right. So can identity be at odds with a critical thinking? Didn't understand the question. We're on to the other questions. Don't worry about it. You already have your brilliant answers. After Rajshed, you've got. So an argument may be valid, but the conclusion may be incorrect. Ding, 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 ding. Accuracy is not the same as validity. Really good insight, critical thinker, Adam. All right, we're going to wrap that up. I thought we had a lot more to go, but I didn't realize we got to end at the top of the hour. So critical thinking, I'm going to take an extra minute because I want to ask another controversial question. Let's say that there's a new trend right now that we're supposed to bring our whole selves to work. how many of you have heard we're supposed to bring our whole selves to work? So what if we're a really emotional person and we think that bringing our whole selves to work means bringing our whole emotional self to work? So how do we deal with the research that shows that high emotional states are at odds with accurate judgment? How do you deal with that? So what does it mean to bring our whole selves to work? If we're an emotional person, or maybe I want to bring my inner ballerina to work. So what does that mean? What does it mean? And what if it's at odds with making good decisions? Aha. Labels are boxes we put people in, but they're helpful, right? Very unreliable, as each person has their own experience, thus their own ideas and ways of thinking. While society or group identity can impact a person's experience, but this does not define the entire person. I think I'm going to give I'm going to give Autumn multiple rubber chickens, because I do think that there is a distinction. And let me know if you want good thinking on this, between viewpoint diversity and perspective diversity. We do need to know that when assessing any kind of differences between groups, between labels like men versus women versus, you could take all kinds of different ways of identifying or labeling. There will be, on average, you can find differences between groups on average, but that has very little impact of how you understand the differences between individuals, because differences between individuals, math, would be far greater than differences between labels or groups of people on average. So that's a really insightful comment, Autumn. All right. Compartmentalizing parts of yourself, packing your emotional backpack neatly, so to speak, is a good way to sort which parts of yourself to bring to work. Yeah, I mean, so if you're supposed to bring your whole self to work, as Adam says, new buzzwords, what does that mean? And is that at odds with making good judgment and good decisions? And we have some exciting things to announce next month with LinkedIn Learning course that's coming out on February 15th. So look for those announcements. All right, I'm going to end because I promised I have to skip a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about. Sorry, I always get overzealous, but I want to leave you with two things. Socrates' final words, just because I think it's really fun, and also then kind of a final thought. So this is Socrates as he is being forced to sip hemlock. And this is his argument to his executioners. I'll do it with my Socrates voice, or just my regular voice. When I leave this court, I shall go away condemned by you to death. But they will go away convicted by truth herself of depravity and wickedness. And they accept their sentence even as I accept mine. I tell you, my executioners, that as soon as I'm dead, vengeance shall fall upon you with a punishment far more painful than your killing of me. You have brought about my death in the belief that through it, you will be delivered from submitting your conduct to criticism. But I say that the result will be just the opposite. You will have more critics. If you expect to stop denunciation of your wrong way of life by putting people to death, there is something amiss with your reasoning. This way of escape is neither possible nor credible. The best and easiest way is not to stop the mouths of others, but to make yourself as good men as you can. This is my last message to you who voted for my condemnation. Socrates, apology. Now, obviously, we don't know exactly because Socrates didn't write things down. But I'll leave you with this. And here's the deal. Whether companies want more critical thinkers or not, as more and more inconvenient truths and correlations fall out of the data that's being analyzed by artificial intelligence and quantum computing, AI that has analyzing capacity greater than the greatest human, we should prepare ourselves. And this may require training in critical thinking and embracing critical thinkers, whether companies want to or not. Thanks. See you next week. Thanks for being such great, good thinkers.